Well, here we are. We're back at it again. We're preparing the bike for the upcoming season. And as part of kind of my introduction to getting into racing and whatnot, one of the things that people definitely have issues with is all the technical requirements. I'm going to talk a little bit about some tips for safety wiring. Now, I'm going to provide a link in the video also. Brian Van at Sport Bike Track Gear, he made a great video on the use of safety wire, how to safety wire like the oil filter, the drain plug, the oil fill, etc. I'm going to put a link to that, and also going to put a link to a comment that someone had posted on the WERA forum about what some of the requirements are. What do they all mean? But typically you're going to have to drill some bolts. But before you do that, I think it's important that you figure out where you're going to drill the bolt before you take it off the bike and drill bolts, because you don't want to do it again. Drilling bolts is a pain, and it takes a long time. You have to be patient. When in Brian's video, some of the fasteners or some of the drilling he did right on the bike, and some places you can't do that. Typically, it's a lot easier to remove the fastener, drill the bolt where you want, and then reinstall it. That being the case, if you need to drill a fastener, you need to figure out where you're going to drill it. So, for example, on the front axle bolt, what I would recommend is any bolt you want to drill is that you torque it to what pretty close to the OEM specifications, and then figure out where on the fastener you're going to drill that, so that if it tries to loosen, the safety wire or whatever you have will resist that and tend to tighten the fastener. This spindle bolt goes into the axle, which comes out on the other side. And so when I put this axle in, I try to position this yellow colored spot in relationship to this break in the fork, this little seam that's right here. So that way, when this is torqued down properly, the holes are in the proper location. I'm not sure if people realize that, but basically a nut and a bolt basically has one thread. And so if it's tightened to the approximate torque, it's going to be pretty much the same position every time. So this is also important if you have places where you have multiple bolts. See, there's two pinch bolts on this side and there's two on the other side. What I would recommend is you take these off. You obviously torque them to pretty much OEM spec. Mark where you want to drill these. It's like in this case, I have the holes marked with a Sharpie. So long ago, I had drilled basically right across here, so that when these are at the proper torque, this clip will go right through the center. That being said, I would take these off one at a time and drill them and then reinstall them. If you take all four off, they're all going to be mixed up, so that because the thread, the female thread on the fork part, even though it's same thread type, where the actual thread starts is different for every one of those fasteners. So that's important that you keep that in mind. Same thing with the brake caliper bolts. See, the brake caliper bolts, that's a lot of drilling. And so for the brake caliper bolts, see, I have these marked so that I know that the one with the yellow goes on top. So when that's put into the caliper, and I torque that down to basically where it's supposed to be, the hole where the safety wire and the clips go is going to be in pretty much the same position every time. You're probably going to save yourself a lot of time and frustration by just figuring out where you're going to drill the fastener after it's been torqued, then drill it. The other thing to keep in mind, especially with these brake caliper bolts, you see that there's a lot of material around these brake caliper bolts that make it difficult to put in something like these clips. You could safety wire it directly. These clips are allowed, at least according to WERA specifications, except for the drain bolt and the oil filter. Those are the only two places that these clips are not allowed. In terms of what has to be safety wired, certainly the axle, the spindle bolt, this is acceptable for the axle on the front. For the rear, I have yellow paint, so that I always put this in so that this axle, this is at the 12 o'clock position. This can obviously go in two different ways according to this flat, so that I know that the thread is in the same position on the other side. So here's the other side, and when this is torqued to pretty much the OEM spec, the yellowish, area, again, I put yellow paint on here. That's pretty much at the 12 o'clock position. And here is where that safety wire is. Again, the clip is acceptable. If this tries to loosen, this is just going to tighten this cable. So that's typically what you want. The next item are the pinch bolts. That's these pinch bolts here. There's 2 per side. Again, a clip is acceptable to go right through. And the clips are really convenient, especially for the front. If you take the front on or off, or move the brakes, etc., it is a lot of safety wiring to rewire the axle bolt, rewire the pinch bolts, rewire the brake caliper bolts. So these clips are fantastic. They'll save you a lot of time. So here's the pinch bolts on this side. Here's the pinch bolts on this side with the clip going all the way through. Now you can get these clips from Home Depot. You could also go to a place like Curvy Girl that sells various size clips. The other thing I'll mention with some bolts you can get pre-drilled. I know brake caliper bolts, like from Curvy Girl, for example, they're already pre-drilled. Save yourself some frustration. Of course, they're not inexpensive, and depending on how quickly you need it, it may be just faster to do the drilling yourself. The brake caliper bolts. So obviously the front brake caliper bolts, have to be wired. They can be wired together, and you can use these clips. That makes life a lot easier for you. Now we're talking about brake caliper bolts. Don't forget the rear. Now the rear caliper bolts, these are something where you hardly ever take off the rear brake caliper. So that being the case, this is just hardwired. And you can see, so I marked where I was going to safety wire this. Again, the safety wire comes around orientation to tighten the bolt in case it tries to loosen. So this is safety wire to the other brake caliper bolt, which again is oriented so that if this tries to loosen, the wire is going to restrain that. Then I also used this other brake caliper bolt as the anchor point for the axle bolt. The next item on the list are the brake torque arms. And basically, a lot of these modern bikes do not have brake torque arms. I'm not sure if that's more applicable to vintage bikes, but that's really not applicable. Speedometer and Tach cables. Well, at least on this bike, the instrumentation cluster it's just a plug-in device. There's no cables for the instrumentation. Again, that may be more applicable to some of the vintage bikes. The next item is a fork oil drain tube. Well, here's a fork off an older R6, and it was 7 R6, and I looked, and there is not an oil drain tube or any kind of oil drain on this fork. Typically, when oil fluid is changed on these forks, they essentially just remove the cap and take the oil out, that way. So that may not be applicable. Again, and that does not have to be safety wired. RTV or silicone is fine per WERA requirements. Next item is the oil filler cap. That's right here. Also the dipstick that has to be safety wired also. And these are just linked together. Now this is acceptable. Some people like to hardwire every individual cap to like a hard point on the bike, and that's fine also. If you do want to wire to like a hard point on the bike, like here's the drain plug on the R6. Right next to this bracket, which is shown kind of right here, this is really just for bodywork. This is just a metal tab. Next time I change the oil, and this is difficult. This would be difficult to drill like underneath. There's a nut under here where I could just remove this, drill it, and then I have a hole to fasten this, because this hole is actually for the bodywork. So if you want to do it to a hard point, that's fine. So the oil drain plug has to be wired. There actually is a wire, safety wire. It's out of view. You cannot see this safety wire going toward the back. Okay, the next item is the oil gallery plugs. Now this is something I kind of struggled with a little bit. basically where are oil gallery plugs. Typically an oil gallery plug is something which looks like this. It's typically, a lot of times it is a kind of a hex nut, and this does not have to be safety wired. Silicone is fine. I didn't really make it too neat because the silicone is clear. So there is a little dab of silicone on here. I did find one here. There's one up in the valve cover, which technically is an oil environment. I'm not sure if that's required or not, or that's per the letter of law, but I mean, I put silicone in that, and there's actually one just like this on the other side. In terms of this bike, this R6, those are the only oil gallery plugs that I could find. I don't think they're super strict with that, but I don't know, maybe I'm just overthinking things, but those plugs, anything which is kind of plugging into the block or the oil gallery, so anything that looks like that is typically an oil gallery plug. Next item is oil lines. Typically these bikes do not have exposed oil lines. Certainly checked, at least when I looked around on my bike, I didn't find any oil lines. Again, some of the correspondence with the WERA that someone had written in a few years ago, I'll put a link to that discussion where he talks about that in more detail. Then on oil filters, Brian talks about that, how like a hose clamp is certainly fine on the oil filter, as long as that is anchored, that's fine. The next item is the rear exhaust mounts. Basically on the exhaust, any fastener which mounts the exhaust system to the frame has to be safety wired. So on this bike with this exhaust system, there's actually two fasteners. There's one here, and then there's one underneath. Now this is a tough one to safety wire. Essentially what I did, and hopefully this can be seen, is on this nut, I basically taken the drill and gone straight down through both the nut and the bolt and put safety wire on there. That's acceptable. This fastener was a little bit easier. I think I removed the fastener, or marked it, removed it, and then safety wired. And see, here's a hard point. Just anchored it right to this hole in this bracket. Now, I don't think includes the bolts that go to the manifold. I don't think that is the intent of the requirement. Yeah, again, the safety requirements say the rear exhaust mounts, so that's not the front. The next item are Kickstarter retaining bolts. Obviously, this bike does not have a Kickstarter. That's not applicable. Removable exhaust baffles. If you're going to a place like Jennings that has stricter noise requirements, the exhaust baffle that you shove in the back, that has to be safety wired. Next item is the radiator cap. That's self-explanatory. This is safety wired, and I have this safety wired. Basically, this bolt was easy to drill, take off, serves as a good mounting point. That's fine. Next item is the coolant drain. Here's the coolant drain for this bike. Here's the drain. I just drilled this, took off and drilled this other fastener so that I have a hard point to safety wire that. So they talk about any pressure fed lubricant line. I'll defer to the email on that item. And then the last item are the brake caliper retaining pins. These kind of like R fasteners, which are located right here. And they don't have to be safety wired, but you see they do have just a dab of silicone on there to seal that. So that meets the intent of the requirement. A few other things I'll mention are basically the side stand has to be removed. And taking off the kickstand or the side stand, I mean, that's easy. That's just, there's like a 13 or 14 millimeter bolt under here that comes off. So actually removing the side stand is not a big deal. The issue is that this assembly actually has a wire that's shown right here that feeds into the ECU. So what happens is, like, when the kickstand is up, it closes the circuit so that you can put the bike in gear and it'll operate. If the circuit is open, like the kickstand is down, there's a fault. Basically, it will not let you put the bike in, well, you can put the bike in gear, but it'll just kill the engine. That's actually why I put like a jumper right here, so that I can, during a race, take the kickstand off, close the circuit, and then I can ride the bike. What some people do is they will just clip the wire, short it together, and then that will close the circuit and you'll be able to put it in gear. But if you ever want to use the kickstand, you could certainly ride off with the kickstand down, which is you know, I don't want to do that. You know, I probably would do that because that's just because I'm maybe absent-minded or whatever. So that's another thing that you should keep in mind. It's not just removing the kickstand, it's also disabling the fault so that you can ride the bike. A couple other items as well is that the coolant cannot be anything glycol based. It has to be something like distilled water, water wetter, nothing with glycol. So this is filled with water wetter, the good pink stuff. One last thing in terms of like number plates, it says in the rulebook that WERA is going to assign you a number. Typically what you should do or whatever, and number plates have to be on the front, the sides, and then on the back. So typically what I would recommend you do is that if you want a certain number, take a look at if that number is in use. You can go to the WERA site, pick a number that you like, see if it's an active number, see if not only if that number is being used by an active racer, but not only if it's an active racer in the classes that you want to race. You could have the same number, but if you're racing in D or C races, for example, and someone's using that number, but they're only using that for a superbike, you could probably still get away with that number. Now, the other thing, if you can't get the number plates, you can get these number plates from a place like whatever, like Pop Shadow, for example. I know someone who does custom vinyls. He did these for me. But let's just say you don't have time or whatnot. And I've seen this before, is that basically what you can do, get yellow tape, plaster that on the front so it looks semi like a plate. You use a big Sharpie or go to Home Depot, get some vinyl numbers or something so that you have the number on the bike at those appropriate locations. It's not pretty. It is acceptable. Keep in mind that the numbers do have to be whatever, like 6 inches high or something like that. They have to be visible, and not only front, sides, and then the rear of the vehicle. And about the only other thing I want to mention is why people use kind of race bodywork is I think there is a requirement that any of the bodywork can't be just like the push pin type fasteners, and that's typically what OEM bodywork is. That is not acceptable in WERA. Anyway, if I think of anything else, I'll include it, but those are just some of the highlights of the tech requirements to go racing.